change your name, I guess, at any time. What's up, Forrest Cooper?
Hey,
Yo,
Ian. It's good to talk to you again.
we were just talking about how we haven't really talked much since last time, which I guess, I mean, we talked a little bit between now and but when we were talking about CQB, close
Yep.
quarters combat.
Yeah. We were
Uh,
doing. I was in your kitchen, and we were doing CQB demonstrations just for
yeah,
fun.
like how to blow a door off the hinges or just blow through a door. Like, do you have to take the hinges off, or is this the kind of door you can just mow through?
Or pieing a corner. If you want
What's
to get the big in a big debate, it's pieing a corner.
what's pieing a corner?
It's like, so if you want to get into the funny nitty gritty of like military vernacular and jargon when it comes to clearing rooms and house clearing and buildings and everything, like that's CQB or close quarters battles or room clearing is exactly where that happens all the time. Everyone has all their little buzzwords that they use. Pieing a corner is simple, and I can use my hands in description. Let's just say, this is a corner that you got to go around, so it's going to be shaped something like. Let's see if I can do it. No, we'll do this. If this is the person, pieing a corner means as you're rounding the corner, you're not just stepping out and then moving, but rather your perspective. You're using angles to observe more of the room as you move around that small piece of either cover or concealment.
So you want no flanking, nothing coming in at a 90-degree. You want to always have your perception have a cone in front of you. You're making sure you're like pieing the thing. Why pie? Why the word pie? Is that the 3.14, the circle? Like you're
No, it's more like slices of a pie. Another really easy example is, um, another way to think about it too is let's just say you're playing a game of, when you're a kid, did you ever play the game flashlight tag? Did anybody ever talk about this? Where it's like,
yeah, where you got to hit them with the light and then they're
yeah,
it.
yeah, okay, so now play flashlight tag in a building and think about how you're going to move through a door or how you're going to cross through a doorway. Is you're not If you're playing flashlight tag, you probably don't want to just jump into the doorway and then turn your light on. Instead, you're going to turn it on and you're going to slowly creep around that corner, adding more light to the room until you get into it, so that there's no way where you can have the light hit you. You're going to have more light first. It's really really easy to demonstrate in person and really hard to do in real life.
Have
Or hard to talk about.
have close quarters combat changed drastically in the last 15, 20 years with technology changing?
As far as technology, not so much in maybe not as much as other parts of war for sure. I think what's more, instead of looking at CQB changing specifically, because there's kind of an inside joke of like time is a flat circle. You're seeing a lot of special operations guys go back to an earlier standard or an earlier way of doing things, because in the global war on terror, especially like 2006, 7, 8, or 5, 6, 7, 8, and then even things with Fallujah and Ramadi, a lot of attention was given to a certain aspect within warfighting, and that was CQB. And now we're kind of maturing a little bit back to maybe an older or more classic style. And I know this kind of sounds a little bit like talking behind the veil, but what I mean by it is, why does somebody have to do this to me right now? I was getting a phone call in, of all things. It's not so much that technology has changed it drastically. It's just gotten more. There are more tools available to people, and so the principle stays the same. And the principle, like in many ways, it looks like, if you were to zoom out in history, it looks very, very similar. I mean, there's going to be some variations from team to team and company to company and military to military, but generally speaking, it's very, very, very similar.
You said they're going back to basics. Are they like figuring out how to rely less on electronics in case an EMP goes off or something?
No, actually, I'm getting a little bit more granular. For a while, in the military, like how they taught stance and how people moved around, walking and stuff, became very squat. So, if you watch the movie Black Hawk Down, is a good example.
I never have.
Okay, so history for the people who are listening. the first sergeant that I served under when I was in 375 was there. He was in the actual event. And so I'm drawing a little bit of history beyond my own time. And so he was a ranger in the Mogadishu conflict. And so what happened is people used to stand a lot more upright when they would walk around and do CQB, when they move around buildings and stuff. And then for a while, especially because of some influences in equipment and gear, the biggest changes are going to be like body armor placement. And then maybe if we're going to add night vision, people started squatting down and kind of leaning in and walking around in this very weird stance. And then now we're going back to standing up straight again. It's very, very granular.
Interesting. What is it? Just because they now expect people to come in low and they're like, you can get back up again? And
it's more on the physicality of the warfighter or the guy who's doing the action. This sort of turtle squat stance just doesn't, you can't do it for very long. It also causes lower back injuries over time. A lot of us have lower back injuries because you're wearing all this body armor and kit and night vision and stuff. And then in addition to that, when you're leaning forward, you think about it as like, it's literally, think of a guy doing about a half air squat and then running around all the time like that. What happens is it actually opens up your chest cavity. DJ Shipley over at GBRS group, and DJ Shipley was a SEAL Team 6 guy. He talks about it pretty well. It's like, well, when you're leaning all the way into your stuff, what it does is it opens up this window because your plates, your body armor kind of sits down here. And then this is a very vital window. And so when you're standing upright, when I'm standing upright, not only am I walking how I normally walk. Well, I mean, slight variation, probably more aggressive, but you see a lot of the physical, how the body normally works. And so when I'm shooting and I'm moving faster, I'm shooting more accurately, and I am having a much better perspective of what's going on in the arena. And so when you're kind of hunched down and squat over, you tend to, it like physiologically encourages tunnel vision. And these are pretty quick ways of saying it, but
are there like times and places to get low? I mean, obviously I would think the answer is yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Where I've been at, so I've been out of the military for some time now, but what I've started using and describing is something kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where most people, when they start learning anything of this skill set specifically, and I'm embedded in firearms, gun culture, training, instructions, philosophy, and all this kind of stuff. So this is me, talking about something that I'm very much so ingrained in. What I typically see people do, whether they're learning a skill, whether it's like long range shooting, competition shooting, whether they're looking at self-defense, home defense, anything of these sorts, what you see is a person usually starts with no skill, which is normal. You don't come out of your mom does not produce you with skills. So you start with nothing, and then they start gaining a certain set of skill sets. They start learning how to do a bunch of things. But eventually they become rather dogmatic, where there's only one way to do everything. There's only one way to do everything. And this is that Dunning-Kruger effect. So people, as they gain, as a student gains skill, you can think about this in like jujitsu as well, or weightlifting, is that they start figuring out the fundamentals pretty well, and they practice it. And maybe this is not a criticism of their character, but what ends up happening is the Rangers do it one way, the SEALs do it another way, the Marines do it another way, the SWAT teams do it another way, and then this guy does it this way, and Delta Force does it that way. And so what happens is a person gets very dogmatic. They kind of pick one of these schools, or they are in one because they're professionally there, and they start perfecting that school. But then they hit that dogmatic approach or that dogmatic shelf where they've learned a bunch, and now they're very skilled at it per se. But the issue is that they're very narrow. Their skill set is very narrow. And then usually what ends up happening is something humbles them, whether they start shooting competition or they learn a different discipline. And then they have to rebuild all the way over, and they have to rebuild it all up again. And that's a good thing, because that second wave, so that you have novice, plateau of dogma, crash, and then they build their skill set up again. That's where you start seeing people learning how to adapt and quickly change between, say, one technique and another technique in the middle of an operation, while communicating that, while being able to communicate, or while being able to shift without having some sort of awkward pause in direction.
What's an example of changing technique?
Okay, so there's oh gosh, we're gonna have to go back to like a CQB issue. But it's when you think, how do you enter a doorway? Let's go with how do you enter a doorway. So this is the assumed scenario is there's potentially somebody inside the room. They probably have a gun. And so we were talking about we're going to eliminate all of the unknowns and the maybes just for the specific point of the scenario. So you've got a doorway down here, and there are two different ways that the assaulting team or the rescue team or the hostage rescue team, whatever their mission set is for the day, there's two different ways that they could approach and enter and clear that doorway. And one way would be is they could stack up on the door, and they could all stack up on the door, which means is kind of your classic, like almost like a Hollywood Call of Duty style looking maneuver, where you get a bunch of people standing outside a doorway, and then the first guy goes, they throw a flashbang in, or they do something, and they're all trying to be as quiet as possible because they don't want to tell the guys inside when they're going in. And then all of a sudden they all rush into the door, and one guy goes left and one guy goes right, and one guy goes left and one guy goes right, because what they're doing is they're filling the room with a bunch of guns and they're clearing it a certain way. But we're still just talking only about the doorway. That's what you'd call a dynamic breach or a dynamic entry. And again, this is kind of a jargon term, but they're going in, they're deliberately pausing if they can right before entering the door, and then they're going in hard and fast. Another option would be for that first guy to sort of, as we were talking about earlier, pie over the door. And so what he's going to do is he's going to move his body in an arc over the door. And as he's doing so, he'll have his rifle up. He's looking in that doorway. And as a little bit more of that room is made visible to him as he keeps moving around, he's able to confirm that 99% of the room is clear. There's nobody there. But then in the event that somebody shoots at him, he can shoot back. And so it's a pretty, like, it's called a deliberate clear. Well, this is what I mean by skill set. A dogmatic approach would say, well, we always do it hard, or we always do it deliberate. We always do, every time we clear a door, we throw a flashbang because it's the best way to distract somebody, and we always hit the door really hard. Or maybe from an inverse perspective, it would be, well, we always do a deliberate clear. Because we can take advantage of everything that's going on. We can see what's in the room, and these are good arguments. But why I'm saying it's dogmatic is you're looking at it as we always do it this way, or we always do it this way. And where you see people start to become really skilled at it, especially as a team, where they can read off of each other's body language. Mind you, when I'm clearing a room and I'm doing this kind of stuff with people, with most people of our skill level or whatever is doing it, we're not actually talking. You kind of develop this like proto language that we just know. I know when my buddy Dan is moving this way. I know when he's seen something because I know what his body does. I can't really describe it. Maybe he stands up a little bit taller. Maybe I can see his feet get more tense. I don't, it's like sort of underneath. But where you start seeing people get really skilled is that they can do both a dynamic entry and a deliberate entry, or they can do a very hard entry to a room, or they can do their kind of slow pie and clear, or even more importantly, they're halfway through their pie and the first guy decides to go in. The rest of the team is not confounded at his change in pace. They know that he saw something, and so they know how to work off of it. That's what I'm talking about as far as like well-achieved, well-skilled individuals in that arena, is that it's not simply that they don't have what we call SOPs, standard operating procedures. What I'm looking for when I'm looking for in a guy who's very, very capable in the realm of CQB is a guy who not only can do the different maneuvers, but him changing between one or another thing to adapt to the scenario doesn't confound him or make him uncomfortable. He's like, okay, I know what he can adapt quickly to the team and how guys are moving. And so
what was your history in the Rangers? Just for people that are listening that don't know too, but I'm also interested. When did you get into it? And then when did you leave?
Yeah, so comically enough, the Ranger Battalion was actually just the beginning for me. So I was homeschooled in a small town in Minnesota, and it was just a very, very tiny place. And I was kind of a small kid, and I was into music. I was probably 155 at 18. Small guy, didn't play football, wasn't interested in sports that much. Went home, went hunting every once in a while. But yeah, so that was it. So at 18, I decided to join the military for a couple of reasons, and one of them was I wanted to actually go see war. I didn't want to just read about it. I like, even at a young age, I kind of figured that there's a lot of talk and not a lot of substance. That's can be a little aggressive, but I'll stick with it. So I joined the military, and I knew I wanted to go into special forces, but at the time, at least that's what I understand, you couldn't join special forces, which is your Green Berets, if you're younger than 21. And so I ended up going into the Ranger Battalion. And Ranger Battalion is the Army's premium light infantry unit. Means they do the night raids, and they do the kind of the special operations fighting thing. Their primary mission set is going to be mostly direct action, which means they're not doing these long influence campaigns. They're not doing these long stealthy what do you think of when you think of like developing insurgencies or training local forces? So I joined the Army in 2008, basic training, airborne school, RIP. A RIP is the Ranger Indoctrination Program. It's a very, very spooky name for basically a selection course. And that was an interesting experience for me because a normal selection course for Ranger Battalion starts with 125 people, and it graduates 25. It's got a really high attrition rate, so very few people make it. However, my class for Ranger selection was the spring of 09. I actually turned 19 in that class. It was one of the first ones after the Obama presidency had started to take over. And so Obama he was elected while I was in basic training. He swore into office while I was in airborne school. And by the time I was in Ranger selection, you could already start seeing the shift in the influence that he had on the military. So the day one of Obama's presidency was surge forces and try to get as many people in. So for us, what we saw in Ranger Battalion was, or in this Ranger selection course was, instead of starting with 125 guys, we started with 315. And instead of graduating 25, which is a 75% attrition rate, we graduated 285. So we only lost about 10% of the students who tried. And you think, well, you can look at this a couple different ways, but when you look at it, you think, well, they needed more people. So did they lower the standards? What happened? Why was this class so different? And the answer is that for those of us who were standing on the parade field who had graduated, we could look to our right and see a guy that we knew passed. We knew he met the standard. Absolutely, no questions asked. Stellar character, high skill level, whatever. And then we could look to our left and we could see a guy where there's no way you passed. How did you get here? Kind of thing. And that looking and seeing that, you'd wonder, what's the value of my achievement, if you want to call it, if they're letting people who don't meet the standard in. But then where the real damage that was done at that time was for everybody who was in the middle, who like they didn't know if they weren't this guy, they weren't the stellar physical stud or the perfect example of a ranger over here, and they weren't that guy. But for a lot of us, and that was a vast majority of that graduating class, we were kind of in that middle ground between, well, I mean, I should have made it, I guess, but it doesn't really matter now because we just kind of got let in. And so we had to deal with that. Then we got put into our units. Ranger Battalion only has 3 battalions. You've got 2nd over in Washington, and then you got 1st and 3rd who are in Georgia. So if anybody says he was a ranger and then he tells you that, and then he tells you he was stationed in Texas, he's lying to you. With some exceptions, but we won't get into that now because they're pretty small. And so what ended up happening is now our team leader had to try to figure out, well, did I get the guy who got let in, or did I get one of the good dudes? And then they had to deal with that for an entire year. And so this was kind of it was an interesting process to see in the military, because you would think a selection process is supposed to leave guys ready to integrate in the unit. Rather, they just sort of passed off that bill, or they were instructed to let that many people through.
Did they get better? Like
within a year, we kicked out about half the people who passed.
Oh, okay.
And some of them self-selected out. Like there was a guy that I was in my squad that I went to, and he within a month decided that he didn't want to be a ranger. He wanted to play in the band. moving laterally like that is not easy. But he just basically said, hey, look, if you're going to send me out, because we were getting ready for my first deployment. So I graduated Ranger selection, and by the time I got to my unit, which was like 3 weeks later, they were already getting ready to go to Iraq. So I was like, all right, well, I mean, let's do this. But he basically explained to the unit that, or to our squad, that there's no reason to send him on a deployment. He's probably going to be useless. So how about you just kick me out, sign the papers, kick me out of special operations, and then I'll go reclass to go work in the band.
Would he have been useless? I mean, no offense to the dude if he's listening, but would he have been a detriment to the group if he'd stuck around?
Ooh. So here's something that here's where this is a really good example of where character matters, moral character. So if a guy is not going to be able to pull his weight, right? He's not going to be able to pull his weight, and that might be physically. So it just doesn't he can't carry his portion of the gear or whatever. Or another example is if he doesn't have the mental emotional the mental and emotional, let's say, endurance or character is not really the right word. Maybe it's fortitude. He doesn't have the fortitude to overcome the hardship that he might be facing, because one of the things that you're going to be engaging in warfare is you have to make moral evaluations on the ground. Hence, this is why I talk about the philosophy of violence. You have to be able to make moral evaluations. You have to think about these things. And so if a person comes and says, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do that, then no, everyone in the team is going to respect it. We're just not going to have you on the team anymore. We're going to send you off somewhere else, because we only want people there who want to be there and are going to add value to the team. And so think about it. A really good way of thinking about it this way is Ranger Battalion had standards. I don't, I've been out for a while, but they had physical standards. So if you can't do the physical standards, you get removed from the unit. Makes sense. We need people to be in peak physical fitness. So if you do not maintain the physical capabilities of doing the job, then we're going to remove you from the unit. And while there may be some jeering and insults that are thrown your way because you didn't keep up with the standard, what's the reality of it is, well, you no longer fit the bill of what we need to accomplish the task. So it's nothing against you, guy, but you're just not here anymore. You're just not here anymore. Like we're not going to, we're going to war in such a capacity that we do not have we're not going to be making exceptions for people. Now, the alternative to that is there was a couple of guys in the unit. There's one guy in particular in the unit that we were in who had a serious injury and ended up losing a part of his leg. And so you would think, well, if you're performing at the peak of military achievement, given there's like Delta Force guys that are really cool too, and I don't want to be outside of my bounds, but the guy who we had a soldier, a ranger in battalion who was missing a leg, who had so much esprit de corps, spirit of the team, and he had so much discipline that he made himself capable and he maintained a high physical standard. And so of course we would want him on the team. Of course he was a part of it, because even though he had what you would think of as like a disability, because he was literally missing a portion of his leg from the knee down, he made himself valuable to the team. Whereas the guy who adds no value to the team, it's nothing personal. If you can't keep the standard, we're just not going to have you in the unit.
Was it the guy that had suffered the injury? Was he just like a super high morale boost to the team? Was he still physically able to maneuver in combat as well, or was he? Oh, that's hardcore.
Yeah, he was. There was no one doubted his physical nor mental prowess. He was very capable.
One of the things that interests me about your work early on is this concept of the philosophy of violence. You were like, yo, I've been to war. Mm-hmm. Do not open that box. That is a Pandora's box of violence. Once you open the box of violence, you can't. I don't know if you said you can't close it again, but the way you were explaining it was just very calm. And like, I can see, in your eyes, whether you've worked through shit or it's just like it's in there. It like shook me to the core. I think about it years later still, but like, what is it? What did you, and I mean, you can get as specific as you want. What did you see that changed you, that made you understand how how I don't know, do you think violence is the wrong road to go down, or how dangerous violence is?
So I'm gonna, to those who are listening, I mean, this might be a little annoying, but I'm gonna have to put on my philosopher's hat first, and that is talking about what do we think about when we think about violence. And so why I don't mind titling it the philosophy of violence, because it's actually a pretty good way of breaking down how we think about these things. We've kind of bastardized the word philosophy to become a stand-in for the phrase worldview, or the idea of a worldview, or even something kind of like metaphysics, which is a philosophical term. So when I mean the philosophy of violence, I don't mean a philosophy which advocates for violence. I mean, how do we understand it? How do we think about it? And what are the tools and mechanisms by which we make moral and other evaluations of the use of force and the use of violence? And so here's a kind of a paradigm that we exist in right now, being referenced to Thomas Kuhn, who is a philosopher and in the 1960s and so forth, but this is where we get the term paradigm shift. In our current paradigm that we live in right now, that I'm talking about 2023, all what we have is we have a consistency. All the people who are very good at violence are either gainfully employed or not participating in it. All the people who are, and so the less capable, or the less skilled and disciplined and trained in violence that a person is, we also see the inverse take place. If you go onto Twitter and you see people advocating for violence, the tendency is they don't actually know what they're doing. And that's not, it's not that it's not that that's okay. It's that this is the consistency that we live in, is that the people who are very skilled in it, who are very, very capable of it, we're dealing with something kind of like what Jordan Peterson talks about in the Pareto distribution. The people who are very good at it are very, 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 very good at it. And there's no kind of, they're very, very, very skilled in this sort of use of force. And what I mean by use of force, even in that sense, is not like being able to do a karate maneuver or learning how to do jujitsu. It's that they're able to effectively build a pattern of life on a target, identify who they're going to engage in or what they're going to do, and then engage in a form of violence that is asymmetrical, as well as almost guaranteed to succeed. So think of it this way. One thing that if you think of like a cartel, or you think of, like a violent group in some city, it doesn't matter. They tend to be boisterous and loud. Do what we say, or else. Who doesn't do that? Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Delta Force. We're not telling you, the American military does not tell you when those guys are going to show up. They just show up, do the job, and leave. And so this is what I mean by, in the paradigm that we live in, especially in the West right now, the people who are very skilled at violence, who've been engaged in it for years, who are in the military, who have not just in the military, but they had plenty of experience in it, because something like 1% of the American population joins the military, and of that 1% of the American population that joins the military, like 1% of it actually sees combat, and of that small percentage that actually sees combat, a very small percentage of it sees a lot, and everybody else sees a little. What you're seeing, what we're talking about as far as like in a philosophy of violence, is as the world changes. So our perspective of war in the West, in America, is very von Clausewitz, very Clausewitzian, which is, we think of battles, we think of the Patriot, we think of these, uniformed soldiers, people standing in line, fighting each other. And that paradigm of war is kind of fading. And we see that with the rise of insurgency, whether it's Vietnam, Afghanistan, or to even where we're at now with things, or with organizations like Black Lives Matter. And then we also see it in what's going on in Israel and Palestine, or Israel and Gaza. And so what you're seeing, though, is that, and what I'm talking about when I refer to the philosophy of violence, is that the application of force is no longer easily reduced to a rule set made by somebody over there. The lines are not clear. The fighters are not obvious. And in the United States, where we have a right to bear arms, that moral weight lies on every single person's shoulders who chooses voluntarily to carry a firearm for self-defense or whatever. So instead of it thinking as some sort of simple rule set that can be determined by somebody over there, what we're doing here, or what I'm doing at Redacted, is I want to focus on how we think about violence, giving intellectual tools. I can teach you how to pick up a handgun and shoot. I can teach you how to clear a room. I can teach you how to shoot at 1,000 yards. I can teach you how to breach a door with an explosive. But what there isn't happening in our world is there aren't people who are bringing forth philosophy and how we think about the use of force, and how we think about how the rules of engagement are created, and how we think about how these things should happen. So I wanted to fill that gap.
I think a lot about how, kind of like what you're saying about how there aren't as many uniformed soldiers, that there aren't really these rules of engagement like we used to have. I mean, are people even considering the Hague? Well, like, what are these like rules of war? Like, don't use incendiary weapons on humans, like white phosphorus, which the Americans reportedly did in 2004 in Fallujah. They use it to light up the room in the argument of, but the byproduct is it melts human skin. But it's like, if their intention wasn't to melt the skin, then it's okay. But the reality is, like, do people even care? Like, like last night we were talking about killing babies, and they're like, no, you can't kill babies in war. And I'm like, well, in Vietnam, 7-year-olds would walk up with a grenade in a basket and blow themselves and the soldier up. So they started shooting at 7-year-olds. If they find a baby in the rubble and they go to pick it up and there's a grenade underneath it that goes off, like, what are the rules right now? I'm confused and I don't see them.
Let's pull back a little bit. Instead of asking what the rules are, let's ask who should have influence over what those rules are. Who's making those decisions? So here's an example from my time. Is I was a team leader in Ranger Battalion in 2000. Short explanation of my time in the military is from 08 to 13 or into 2013. So I got into Ranger Battalion in 2009. I was I kind of did a slightly different variation of the standard Ranger track. I did 4 deployments, 1 to Iraq, 3 to Afghanistan. I learned Pashtun. I became a designated marksman. I learned how to do breaching. I became a team leader, went to Ranger school, all this kind of stuff. So I became a Ranger team leader. And then after that, I was at the decision point between getting out of the military or staying in. I chose to get out. And then very quickly after that, I ended up working for a well-known private contracting company, or what some people like to refer to as a PMC, a private military contractor. And so I worked for a company for a while. And then after that, I stopped doing that because I didn't want to be overseas all the time. And I had met my now wife. And so I came home, went to college, got married. From there, we'll get into this. So after I graduated with my degrees in philosophy and theology, eventually ended up as an editor for Recoil magazine, which is how you and I met. But then also during the riots in Minnesota, which is where I was living at the time, there was a lot of, let's just say, private military work to be done, which was pretty intriguing. And then from there, I've been to Ukraine now for a humanitarian gig. And then now I'm running my own thing. So this just this really odd train. I wish I could say that I had a standard life path, but it's been messy. So rules of engagement. Let's talk about this. So I was a team leader in Ranger Battalion, sitting in this room, and I remember because one of the lights was kind of going out, and I'm sitting in the middle of the right side, and I'm listening to our lieutenant talk about what the new rules of engagement are, and like they came down from on high, mind you. So like somebody made these rules, and then they passed them, and they down, and they passed them down, so they had to disseminate them all the way to us. So as a leader, since I'm a team leader at that time, I have guys that are underneath me who I am responsible for. And I need to teach them not only how to do their job, but I need to also inform them of what the rules of engagement are for this upcoming deployment that we're about to go on. And the rules of engagement that were passed down to us at this time were such that if a man, that if we were deploying to Afghanistan, if a man was standing in the doorway of his house with a PKM, a belt-fed machine gun, and he was shooting that belt-fed machine gun at us, a belt-fed machine gun, you can theoretically it has an infinite magazine if you can just keep adding belts, but it's a very, very obvious big machine gun, right? And so if he's shooting at us in his doorway with a belt-fed machine gun, we are not allowed to shoot back because his wife might be standing behind him, or we are not allowed to use certain munitions because there might be somebody else in the house. So this is what the rules were passed on to us. And so as a team leader, I have to explain to a 20-year-old kid, and I'm only like 23 at the time, but I have to explain to a 20-year-old kid that if a guy is shooting it at you with a machine gun, you simply have to wait for him to stop, and then we'll find another way to apprehend him, which is ridiculous, just asinine. And the reason, and what you're seeing here, what's the flaw, is the person who's making the decisions does not have any skin in the game. Another example of it would be, so another example of who makes these decisions is that during the time that I joined the military, people talked about like soldiers as baby killers and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, the person there's a book worth reading called Skin in the Game by Nicholas Nassim Taleb. The person who has the immediate interaction with the event is going to have the most information and be able to make the best decision. But what we've done is we've bureaucratized it to nameless, faceless people in Washington who write the rules of engagement such that they never have to pay the consequences for them. And that's a problem. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but is it that there's a concern that if the guy on the ground is wholly in charge of the rules of engagement, that they're going to suffer battlefield fatigue or trauma and then just snap and be like, kill them all? Like, don't hold back. Like, we need to get out of here alive. And that mindset is also because like the brass, the leadership's willing to make calculated losses. Like, they're like, we will sacrifice this platoon in order to get this target.
Yeah, I believe that has everything to do with it. I think that is a concern, and I'm not trying to speak too naively on the subject. What I'm trying to say is, yes, that is definitely a concern. Like, we need to have checks and balances, but I want to I know the Israel-Palestine conflict right now, or the Israel-Gaza conflict, is really a hot button item. But instead of looking at it from like who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, what we can do is we can use Israel and Palestine as a really good example to look at how these things are evaluated and judged in the world. So this is an asymmetrical warfare case, easy and clear. Israel and Hamas, or Israel and the Palestinians, or Israel and Gaza are being held to different standards. Israel is expected to be precise, specific. There's expected to be discerning between combatants and non-combatants. This is a Clausewitzian style, European-made format of warfare. This idea of war, the idea of the rules of engagement, came out of a Napoleonic warfare era in Europe, where people who were engaged in different wars, whether it's France and Prussia, France and Austria, these different countries, you had the balance of power going on, developed this concept of the rules of warfare. And part of the reason for that was to limit the scale of warfare. They wanted to create what we call limited warfare. And limited warfare is what we think of as the status quo, but in the history of the world, it's not. So limited warfare is very specifically limited targets. I can only shoot at combatants. I cannot shoot at non-combatants. I can only destroy military targets. I cannot destroy schools and hospitals and churches. So Israel is being expected to hold to a standard that is a European invention. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing, doesn't mean it's a good thing. It's just that's what it is. Limited warfare from a regular standpoint. Soldiers wear uniforms, they get issued their weapons, they are trained by the military. That's regular warfare. Hamas, on the other hand, or what the people in Israel are in conflict with, are not held to that standard. They can so that means building rockets out of pipes, or using IEDs, or attacking civilian structures, or whatever you want to call it, but they're not held to the same standards. And this is what we call an asymmetrical war, where one group is held to something like the Geneva Convention. Maybe they're a part of NATO, they're a part of the EU, they're held to some standard. The other side is not. And that is, if I were to describe that, the reason why I think that's important and why I would want to bring that up, and I know for people that this can become very like an emotionally grabbing subject, but we need to pull back a little bit. We need to pull back and look at the tactics, the techniques, the skills that are being used, is that Israel and Gaza are being held to different standards. And so if you look at American history, and this is another good case of that, before if I just finished a book called The First Way of War, and it talks about what the early days of what would be referred to as a ranger in America. And what they were is they were citizens and civilians hired by the crown or the government at the time to go out and extirpate the opposing forces by destroying their homes, their women and children, their farms, everything, so that they had nothing to live off of. The army marches on its belly. And so the American method of warfare, and to be clear, this is not universal, this isn't everywhere, but these are examples of how warfare has this very clean front that everybody likes. It's the tanks and the movement, and it's World War II. But then but then what you realize is that the fringes of warfare is where where the fighting really happens, and that is very bloody and very ugly. And so the early rangers in America, before America was even a country, were engaged in this irregular style warfare where people would be enlisted of a sort. They would be hired, hey, go burn this village down, go take care of this force. And whether the conflict was legitimate or not, whether the conflict between the settlers and the Native Americans were legitimate or not is not the point. It's that, and at some point in time, America said, okay, we're going to only be standard now. We're going to get rid of all this irregulars, and then we're just going to have regular soldiers. And that was well after the American Revolution. In fact, what happens is when you take regulars, you take uniformed soldiers, and you put them in a situation where irregular warfare is king, they die, they lose. Every time. If you take irregulars and you try to put them in formations, and then you try to tell them to fight like a regular army, they lose almost every time. And so these are two different types, two different sides of the coin that is warfare, but everybody likes this side, but this is what really is happening now.
Yeah, you were saying that the Rangers in the early days, or the preeminent group before the Rangers, would be tasked to go kill the women and the children of the enemy so that they don't have any reproduction capacity in 20 or 30 years. No matter what, you're going to win the war because they don't have any kids. And there's a lot of like, don't target children. But I'm like, yo, bro, I get that's the clean face of war. But the reality of irregular war is you target everything that's a threat. I mean, I think, am I wrong? It's horrible.
It's horrible, but this is where it is. The thing about it is horrible. Like, I'm not trying to make an explanation and justification for these things, but another example would be, how did America win World War II against the Japanese?
Well, the atom bomb, notoriously, two of them, Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm. And then before that, it was Dresden. And we didn't use a nuclear bomb, but we firebombed Dresden.
200,000 people melted to death, suffocated and burned to death from the firebombing of Dresden, yep. I believe.
This is
civilians.
This is the weight of the question, which is, we like this idea of limited scale warfare where it is just my soldiers fighting your soldiers, and that is an ideal, and we want to. Warfare is going to happen, and we want to continue to maintain that standard as much as possible. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. And as a result, as the West has standardized into this formalized format of warfare, what we've seen across the world is the rise of insurgency.
I'm also concerned with free energy. I'm obsessed with high tech, advancements in technology. But I'm like, if everyone had a fusion pack, like Timothy McVeigh, who did what, the Oklahoma City bombing, is that what, if he had infinite amounts of energy, would he have blown up? Or was that the Unabomber, Timothy McVeigh, or was that the other guy? I get him and the other dude with the manifesto mixed up.
Yeah. No, that would be
the Unabomber, Timothy McVeigh.
Timothy McVeigh is industrialization and its consequences, or industrialized man. He should be the Unabomber. I'm just gonna.
Yeah, I think that's the guy that hit the Oklahoma City the Oklahoma City Capitol Trade Center building or something. Anyway,
that was Timothy McVeigh.
If someone like that had infinite amounts of electricity, would they have blown up 80 buildings? Like, if these asymmetrical warfare combatants that have no concept of like the Geneva Convention, or
it's not that they don't. It's not that they don't have a concept of it. They don't respect it, and that's
So if they had infinite amounts, because I'm like, everyone should have unlimited power. My early days of socialist mindset. Now I'm like, maybe there's a reason why the government is like keeping things from the civilians. Weaponry, like, yeah, you have the right to bear arms, but do you have the right to carry around nuclear bombs. I don't know, because if every rando that fights asymmetrically that doesn't care about the Geneva Convention has a little nuclear bomb, I feel like the species would be done for.
Okay, so like I lived in Minneapolis. I was living in Minneapolis during the summer of love, 2020 into 2021. And and one thing that we saw happen quite frequently is that we would see protesters, demonstrators, or whatever marching through downtown Minneapolis, kind of like a conquering army, a little odd looking, carrying their weapons. They had, and this is very much so pro Black Lives Matter momentum. And they would be carrying these weapons. Some of them would be dressed in some sort of like a Black Panther's garb, and they'd be carrying their stuff down through the city, right? Kind of in a demonstration, like we're here, we're protesting police brutality or whatever. And this is also the funny thing is that like most of us with professional experience were having a kind of a fun time of it, because it's sort of like a clown show, like seeing what people have and how they set their stuff up, and you're like, it's a never ending form of entertainment. You're like, holy shoot, like this guy's got he's got a high point and he's trying to carry it, and it doesn't matter. We're just laughing at it because you got professional guys who've been doing this for like 20-30 years, and then you got guys that are like, I'm demonstrating, and you're like, cool, dude.
You just see how vulnerable they are, like
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah, like so, like I mean, like a dude who's walking through downtown Minneapolis. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, the demonstration of the rights is great. Like, there's no issue there. It's just sort of like, man, I really wish we could get along. I really wish we could get along, because there's so much that people could help you with. Like, he's wearing his plate carrier all wrong. He's got his gun all set up, completely jacked up. It's all it's he's this guy's demonstrating and he's so proud about him. He's like, oh, we're protesting. And you're like, yeah, dude, like you're a loot drop. You're like, have you ever played Borderlands? Like, you're a loot drop. You're just gonna, because like your plate carrier's all messed up and none of it's working the way I'd love to sit down and help you for like 20 minutes. But unfortunately, I feel like if we sat in a room together, we wouldn't get along. But the point being said in that is, and kind of bringing that up is it's I want to go back. I hate to do this to you one more time, but you're talking about unlimited energy. And I think one thing that humans wrestle with is, why do they go to war? And I've heard it talked about before that if we could create, let's just say, some form of infinite energy, we could solve the energy resource crisis in the world, people would stop going to war. They'd stop going to war because everyone would have enough. No one would be starving. There would be no end. There would be no, if we could end resource scarcity, would warfare end? And the answer is no. People don't go to war for grain and crops alone. They go there. There is something much deeper within us that causes us, that motivates us, that inspires us, good or evil, to go to war. And that might be closer to a concept of justice. It might be closer to a concept of identity, but it's not simply like a resource game. Has resources. It's a very boomer mindset. It was very indicative of the new atheist movement that kind of took over the late end of the boomer generation, that into the early younger millennials that started to see the world in purely materialistic means. That war, the only reason why people go to war is because of resources and limited energy. But no, that's just not the case. Not only is it,
You think that people want to fight just because they enjoy fighting? Like, it's like, I just want to do it, or does
I'm sure.
that erase pretty quickly when you get involved with fighting?
No, I think some people do. I don't think everyone does. I think there are people who enjoy the process.
But you're right, though. I don't think anyone's like, let's start a war because I want to fight somebody. That's not it. That I don't think that happens. It's got to be because they want territory, resources. They think the enemy is bad for some reason.
They're concerned about strategic values. They have a long-term plan. They don't have a long-term plan. Old grievances, new wars, threats and concerns. There are many different issues. I mean, people don't go to war just because of resources. It certainly has an influence, but it's not the only one.
Well, so I feel like I derailed you a little bit when you were talking about the crowd. When you were doing security at, like, what was it in Minnesota?
Mm-hmm.
If all those were you thinking about if they all had like their own nuclear power pack, all those dudes in the crowd, like, would we be doomed if everyone had infinite amounts of electricity? Is it good that we're keeping it away from the common man?
Maybe the limitation of, this is a dangerous one. There are certainly people in this world who I would never want to have access to certain things. However, that is in contrast and that is in conflict. It's in tension with the values that we hold, and that would be that the rights of man and the rights of the individual. What I would rather have, where I have a major issue is not so much the limit of, like, I don't like the limit of access to materials. Now, infinite. My camera will do that.
Yeah.
Turn it back on in a second.
Nice.
It's been doing this lately. I've been trying to get my studio working. But as
That's
you can
good.
see, as you can see here, we're in beautiful America. There we go. But the point with that phrase is, I know it's going to sound like a sidestep, but the issue is that it's the education, not just education like in a formal version of education, but so much of our ability to make moral evaluations of the use of force are, and I mean to use this in its specific sense, not into like a colloquial sense, is actually retarded, as in not like I'm describing it as, but it's as a verb. We are damaging the population's capability of comprehending the use of force within a moral framework by restricting them access to arms. If everybody had an infinite tactical nuke tomorrow, I'm pretty sure the world would disappear.
Do you think there's value to exposing children? Obviously, I think that you would answer yes, and I believe that exposing them to arms training would be smart when they're in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, learning how to fire a weapon, what it is, all that. But exposing them to the violence, the gore, like, is there value to exposing children to the outcomes of misusing a grenade, or like show them this is what a blown open body? Because like I think traumatizing might not be the way, but at the same time, if you don't know how horrible it can be, are you going to go down that road inadvertently?
The purpose is to limit. What is the purpose? And the purpose is not to expose everybody to the gore. It's to limit it. We want to limit it. We want to continue that philosophy of limited violence. And so let's go into like a case by case basis. Children, no, I don't want to expose children to gore. They're not going to handle it. It's like when you're when I'm teaching somebody, you don't start with the end. You don't start with like the horrors of war immediately. You have to prepare them for handling it and understanding it and being able to morally evaluate it. Let's go back into the subject of PTSD. Is that one half of the coin of PTSD is the moral injury, and the moral injury of PTSD is, by my observation, typically a result of a person entering into a warlike scenario without a proper moral framework in which to evaluate it. Sounds really philosophy wise, but that's kind of who I am. And so what we'd want to do is we'd want to prepare people for understanding that. And so take a child, teach them how to shoot, take them hunting, teach them, because when you shoot an animal, you're going to know what it looks like. Like you're going to see it. I'm not saying go and wantonly kill animals for entertainment's sake. There's a lot of things going on out there. Conservation still needs to be done. And then as they mature and as they grow older, like a parent ought do, then you want to be able to pass on that information so that they have a check and balance in their system. They have an understanding of the proper moral framework by which force is done, and that it isn't some simple, glorious video game. It's not some sort of like, oh, I shoot them and ba-ding, it's all great. Like, no one really thinks that way. But the issue is that as we don't bring it up to people, think of an inner city gang in North Minneapolis. Right? You give a 15-year-old a Glock or not even a Glock, a gun with a fully automatic trigger and a 33 round magazine. You tell him to go kill another kid. He doesn't know what it's going to look like, and you don't want that. You don't want that scenario. But the alternative is that when when you hand him the handgun, he goes no, and he unloads it and he puts it away. Like, I'm not going to go do that because it's evil. We want to be able to train people to understand it and make moral decisions in that framework.
Like with recruiting for the military, that's something that for a while I was like, fuck the military. After like 2006, 2007, Bush, I felt like he was abusing us and sending our troops into conquer foreign countries. I was like, fuck that. But now I'm realizing, like, if we don't have a military, then other countries do. and then they might set the new global paradigm of what you can and can't say in public. Fuck that. American liberal economic order all the way. Now I'm like big business, military, industrial. I don't like blowing people up for money necessarily. I'd rather be blowing up drones and training against swarm drone defense, because drone swarms are really, I think, the potential. But like,
so you create you create a drone swarm army. They create an EMP army or whatever, and you've got robots fighting each other. And so if you've got a stalemate where once you reach a stalemate, a status quo between these two, not a status quo. Once you reach a stalemate between these two robotic armies, then somebody's going to go around and start killing people again. That's what happens. That's how wars are fought. One side has more power until then you get a balance. You get two people fighting, and then someone has to extirpate the other side. And so they're going to start using irregulars, and they're going to go around the back, and they're going to start cutting out the systems that build your army up. European World War II was a short form version of that. Vietnam is a longer form version of that. The long march through the institutions is an even longer version of that.
So you think if we started to retrofit our military industrial complex for drone swarm defense, like EMP, laser defense, things like that, that eventually we're going to have to retrain to fight humans, like just go for the meat again, because that's the brain of the robots?
Yeah. So if you let's use this is going to be a metaphor, but it's kind of a thought experiment. If the American military completely came out with a drone tomorrow, a robot, doesn't matter what it looks like, but it's a robot that could replace every single soldier right off the bat. So they never had to put human lives on the front line. You'd have to deal with one ethical question of, well, then if an enemy combatant destroys one of our robots, are they considered an enemy combatant? Because they didn't kill it, they didn't fight you, they didn't shoot at you, they just blew up a robot. So you have an entirely new ethics question to deal with. Is just like, well, what does the Geneva Convention look like with artificial intelligence in this sense? Or what is, because I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not exactly a fan of the Geneva Convention. I think that it's either a little bit archaic or just sort of, it's more of a cudgel and less of a tool. But
what is it about it you don't like?
I don't like the way that it is. I don't like the way that it is unequally handled, and I don't like I have a very long frustration with, it seems like the people who are wielding the rules at that have no skin in the game. They don't have any experience. They're not if a person writes, if there's a new rules of engagement or something like that comes out, the person who writes the rules of engagement never pays the price. So if you're going to tell soldiers to go and they can't fight people, but they're supposed to go win a war, like, the person who wrote that has no skin in the game. They have no decision making. And sometimes it doesn't mean that they're malicious off the bat. It's just that we have kind of bureaucratized that process. The concept of it is fine, but the bureaucracy of it needs to be corrected.
The bureaucracy meaning like
the people who make
the rules on the ground.
Yeah, no, the people who make the decisions do not pay the consequences for those decisions. The people
the weapons are getting so much more destructive, like depleted uranium. You could argue that violates the Geneva Convention because they put off uranium after the bullets get lodged in the ground. They're putting off slow dose of radiation, but that's not going to stop people from using them because they penetrate armor made out of depleted uranium, and it's the only thing they can. So it's like bombs themselves, explosions. I mean, a lot of it is like you hit a target, but it's going to kill everything in the radius of the target, including the children. Did you violate the Geneva Convention because you didn't target the child necessarily, even though you gotta, I think with bombs, you should be accounting for the radius of the blast radius is your target, whether or not.
Yeah. Accounting to who?
According, like, if the blast radius is the target, you're
no,
asking
who's to hold the account?
Yeah, right. Exactly. The winner, basically.
Well, and this is why in my where my position comes out of is that my observation of a lot of the world is that we have reduced we have sort of neglected how we think about violence. We've neglected the philosophy of violence. Now, this is me tooting my own horn, and I completely get it. But it's like, that's the issue, is that you have all of these questions about how this stuff should be done, but we need to engage in that one. And one of them is, we need to develop our officers, and we need to develop our military and our enlisted men especially, and give them the authority to make decisions on the ground, but train them up to be capable of making wise decisions. It is a decentralized answer. The Centralization, Clausewitz, officers and generals, decentralized, irregular, individuals, gun culture, whatever. So these are two different sides. Special forces, special operations is all over here. They're sort of the weird fusion of the two. And so where special operations is extremely successful, Ranger Battalion, Delta Force, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, is that they have oversight, but they have limited oversight in the sense that they're trained up to be very capable on the ground. And then they make wise decisions, and they're able to make decisions. Jocko Willink is a good example. Decentralized leadership, or what did he say? Is that, like everyone? Yeah, I think he talks about decentralized leadership. Every single person on the team is built up so that they are capable of making decisions. There's not a whole bunch of people waiting for the officer telling them what to do. And so and this is the direction that we should be moving for. If we are going to focus more on rules of engagement, we're going to end up with more centralized. We're going to end up with a continuous bureaucracy of centralization.
Yeah, Napoleon notoriously gave his marshals decentralized command, and that was how they developed the corps system. And then he gave each of his guys their corps of dudes, and they were way more effective on the battlefield. It was pre-radio. Now we have radio, so you kind of. But like, do you think that if each of the soldiers in the platoon has the ability to take control and run the show, that there would be dudes stepping on each other's toes if they each want to do something, and that there's no central authority, then there's going to be a madness or chaos?
We have solved that problem, and that is having a rank structure and having a team focus. The issue that I'm saying is that we have focused a lot on the authority of that rank structure, but we haven't built the other side, which is the team building aspect.
How do you do that?
That is the hard work of being a team leader. You have to do that, and you have to build up your guys to be confident in their skill set, and then teach them to be able to make wise decisions on the battlefield. And this is where I think this is, again, where like I exist in a state of conflict. I don't want the government per se being the end all be all rule and authority when it comes to anything that has to do with morality, because there's an issue there, separation of church and state in a sort of way. But the other side of it is that that's where the focus needs to be. And so in a practical application, go to your military and scrap every single program that you have that is start scrapping programs. You have an enormous amount of resources is wasted on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, is wasted on like this kind of weird version, and I don't know what it is anymore, but like, essentially don't rape classes. Like, I'm sorry, dude. You got all these, there's an immense amount of resources that the bureaucracy of the American military wastes on all of these components. Marines live in bases that have black mold. Why aren't we fixing that? We have all these issues, right? And instead we're chasing widgets and new ideas and politics as usual. Start getting rid of those programs, take those resources, and get rid of the people who are not holding to standard, the morbidly obese soldiers. Doesn't matter what your MOS is. Start moving people out, and then take that resource and start distributing it to your officer corps, and have them engage in moral philosophy, and have them engage in reading. I mean, officers have to read, but then also pass that information down to your guys. If you're a platoon sergeant, if you're a PL or a platoon leader of a unit, your guys are going to want some of your guys are going to want to read books. Those are going to be the guys that you're going to want to be able to build up. And so having these conversations and having this communication, building up that level of esprit de corps in your unit is what's going to make it stronger. And so instead of the government, the bureaucracy wasting all of this money, completely wasting it on this diversity, equity, inclusion stuff, or whatever the new, thing is, like, and there's it's kind of a funny example that I've seen happen recently is that, so I was in Ranger Battalion I got out in 2013, and since then you've had this like huge question of whether women should be in special operations. What's the purpose of special operations? Why aren't we asking that question? Instead, we're asking it, can women do it too? The question is, what are they adding to the team? How are we making the spear sharper? Are we actually becoming more accurate in our decision-making process? No, we're trying to take something that might work and add another element to it because of some other reason that has no military value. Just arbitrarily saying that women can be a part of special operations has no, and I'm being specific, arbitrary added addition of adding women to special operations has no meaningful value to the unit, unless you say, okay, we're building a new program that does this. It adds something. Like what is, how are you making anything better? And don't give me some like, oh, we're gonna be a better team, or we're gonna, oh, women are more empathetic or something. It's like it just is decay. Yeah. Do I think that women shouldn't belong in special operations? Wrong question. What I'm asking is, what value add are we even looking at? How are we making the team better? How are we making the individual better? How are we building up his life so that it's not the norm of Ranger Battalion for a guy to be 27 years old and on his third marriage? Why is that the standard? So adding women to the unit is not going to make that better. The tragedies and the issues that we're having in our American military right now are not on the war fighting side. We're good at war. We are really good at it. Americans are particularly good at it. For various reasons. But then so how many soldiers died in the global war on terror, the 20 years of Afghanistan and Iraq? Less than 10,000. How many soldiers in that time committed suicide? 100,000. That's a tenfold loss. Those numbers are loose, but don't quote me on those numbers, right? Because I've heard as little as 60,000 have committed suicide, and as little as 6,000 people died overseas. Like these kind of things, right? But there's some variation in the numbers, but we're losing the battle. We're losing the battle not because of our ability to go and arm the tip of the spear. We're losing the battle because we are wasting our people and telling them that they're useless and then getting rid of them.
Do you think that adding women in the military is increased infidelity?
Yes, but I'm going to be frank on it. It's sort of like going from a 0 to a 1. It's not going to yes, I think it has.
But like it might be not, like the opportunity cost might be worth it. Like we have
Yeah.
all these types of soldiers, so it might be worth it.
Yeah, I mean it's literally just because, well, if you're deployed, it's a very simple. It's because if there were no women there, then 90% of the people would have no one to like cheat on their wife with. So like, but that's probably not the best metric, because it's sort of a, if you're deployed and you're only deployed with dudes, it's really hard to cheat on your wife unless you're going to be gay.
Or like go to a bar or something and hook up with one of the locals. But you're saying deployed. When
you're deployed, you're not going to a bar unless you're like a really cool guy.
I think we should, it's been over an hour, and I mean, we kind of started to talk about the basics. This was really awesome. We could do it again and go even deeper. I had a super chat I wanted to pull up. Somebody, Brewmaster Monk. Are there any signals we should look for before constitutionally approved violence, or should us normal people only engage in defense of our property?
Are you gonna give a shot at that one, or is it my turn?
Constitutionally approved violence. So you're talking about like congressional declarations of war, signals to look for. I'm not exactly sure how to answer it, but what do you think, Forrest?
So I'm going to read the question one more time. Are there any signals we should look for before constitutionally approved violence? The term constitutionally approved violence is coming across as a bit of loaded language. And the signals that we're talking about we are in the air right now. We're in the gray area. Let me be absolutely clear on this one. There are issues. And a case in point for it might be something like this. You need to be moral and you need to be strategic. You need to be able to do both. If you're simply strategic, then you will bankrupt yourself by thinking that there is no truth but power. And the problem of that, the problems with that philosophy are very short. One, it's immoral as hell, and the other one is it tends to lose. So it's sort of a fake utilitarianism. But so the issue being said is, when the U.S. military, not the U.S., when the ATF issued the brace ruling against the that happened early this year, And they said that people with AR-15 pistols that put a brace on it could no longer put braces. They took something that they had legally approved for 10 years and then arbitrarily just suddenly said it's not, you can't do this anymore. They did it after a huge amount of the economy and the gun culture had taken on fire, had bought these things. And so what they did is, so this decision, this brace ruling, out of nowhere, capriciously and arbitrarily, the ATF decided that a firearm, a tool that was legal, is no longer legal, and people had hundreds of thousands, if not or easily millions of them. So they came out and they said this, and immediately most people responded to this as, "Oh my gosh, we can't have our braced pistols anymore." Okay, well, this is what it was. This is my diagnosis. The brace ruling was not only a politically advantageous action to take against a political opponent, but it was also a form of economic warfare. If when the ATF banned the pistol brace, how many businesses did they ruin? How much income was lost? How many people lost jobs? How many people lost livelihoods? And how many of those people would be the kind of people that they identified as voting against them or against their political candidate of choice? It was a format of economic warfare. Does that mean that we are permitted to engage in the rules of, are we going to engage in Geneva Convention limited warfare against the ATF? No, not at all. That would be foolish. The purpose is to create a reaction. No, but we do have to engage in the hard work, which is the long work. If we're going to talk about the long march for the institutions, we got to do the long march back. If we're going to look at it this way, this is one third way of example of it, and it's a great question. It's a hard one, but this is what we do focus on over on my channel here, is that if the country of China sends or sells precursor chemicals to a non-state actor, which is a cartel in Mexico, and that non-state actor spends $350 to get the chemicals, and the Chinese government sends over a chemist to help them build fentanyl. So then that cartel, which is a non-state actor, makes a bunch of fentanyl and traffics it into the United States. And for every $350 they spend to make fentanyl, they make $25 million. Not to mention, that's a really good investment. $350 in, $25 million out. Not a bad investment. But so now you have a state supporting a non-state actor to engage in not an official war against the United States, because that fentanyl is killing 100,000 people a year. What is it? I don't know now.
That's a number I heard lately.
It's killing a lot of people. And they're killing Americans, and they're burdening the American system, and they're burdening the American economy, and they're destroying our infrastructure, and they're attacking the people who are in this perfect case where they are. Read a really good book to read is Why Young Men by Jamil Javani, where he talks about how insurgencies will target people with possibly legitimate grievances to turn them into extremists. So now you're creating a system here. So if we can confirm that that China is using the non-state actor, that is the Mexican cartel, to engage in economic warfare against the United States, what is the proper recourse? Because we can't do nothing, but we got to do something. And that is the question at hand. That's another way of rephrasing it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of exercising your First Amendment right and talking about the problem, because like some people have repositioned it to say, well, what's happening is they're poisoning the U.S. population. It's not just like you're saying, it is economic warfare, but it's also poisoning children and citizens. So like if the Chinese are really involved with the Mexican cartels to
oh no, they are. We know
it could conspire to poison the Americans. That's like well, it violates the Geneva Convention. Like poisoning is outside of modern warfare sensibilities.
They're engaging in non-standard warfare, and this is if you want to engage in not a fun thing, but this is where we're at as a society right now, is that the era of limited warfare is fading. It's going away. It's not holding as well as we want it to be. Some of that is because of technology. Some of that is because of culture. Some of that is because of time. And so that era, the easily defined era, is going away. You have two choices: to abdicate and not participate, and whatever happens, you're just a collateral. You're not innocent, you're just collateral. Just be clear here. Or you can start to concern yourselves with the slow progress of understanding how it's a long process. Trust me.
That's
So
why it's so important to talk about the philosophy of war and combat and violence, because it's like it's the power is in our hands. I feel like World War III started in 2001. Personally, I'm like that was 9/11 is the inciting incident. The United States has been winning World War III for 23 years,
mhm.
and we have kind of a responsibility to not snap sideways and go insane as a culture right now. A lot of armed people asking questions like this, like, are there signs that we should look for, like before we follow Thomas Jefferson's advice? And like we need absolute discernment and to understand, I think, the Pandora's box of violence without having to go through it. So that's why people like you are so valuable and your perspective so valuable for us.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, man. I want to point people also in the description to your website. I think it's Forrest Cooper, but also you mentioned there's Redacted, one of your other companies.
Okay, so yeah, I started at this company called Redacted. On Instagram, it's Redacted LLC. We have a podcast, or I keep a podcast, and it's 3 to 5 times a week. We publish episodes. I interview people from across the spectrum of gun culture and beyond. So we've had some of like the Manosphere guys. We've had like Jack Donovan on because he's been an influence in my life. We've had a lot of people like we've had intel officers, we've had military guys, special operations dudes, private contractors, people who build guns. We've had all this sort of like instructors, trainers, and we've had a whole bunch of guests. Everyone from like T-Rex Arms over here to different, like different conversations, Pageosity, and the purpose of the podcast is to get people of different perspectives together. And so recently we had Luke Brown, who is he's a marketing guy for a company called Modlight, but he's also a homesteader and small community guy out of Idaho. And then citizen, never joined the military. And then we had an active duty special operations guy, Marcus Singletary, who does lockpicking and then like kind of a 5th generation warfare conversation. So we had those guys talking about it.
What is that on YouTube?
Yep. So we're on YouTube. We're on Spotify, Rumble as the Redacted Culture Cast, or just Redacted Culture Cast.
I'll put those links in the description so everyone's got access to them after the video shuts down. And we also have one more super chat I'm going to read before we rock and roll. John Paul Larson, is he aware Dahlonega Rangers that worked at boarding school in the same town and did extreme violence, psychological and physical, on its students?
Am I aware of the Dahlonega Rangers that worked at boarding school in the same town? Are we talking about Dahlonega, Georgia?
Sounds like it.
Yeah, so I am by a different name or by cursory experience, or I am not at all because I don't know about this specific event.
Man, thinking about psychological experimentation on soldiers is fascinating. Like the LSD experiments they did on British soldiers.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I thought we were going to get into. This year I went down to Mexico and I did an Ibogaine DMT experiment.
Oh, awesome, man.
So we'll have to talk about that next time. I went down there for a TBI injury. About the last time I think you and I talked was in spring of 2022, and by spring of 2023 I was starting to have real bad issues with memory loss and mental clarity, and so I was able to go down to there and engage in that. And we'll talk about, is that something I have time? So
yeah, did the Ibogaine, I mean, I'm gonna hit the bathroom and then we can I'm gonna ask you some questions about the Ibogaine, but the floor is yours.
Sure. Yeah, so like if people want to follow what we do here, you can find us on Instagram at Redacted LLC. You can find us on YouTube. It's the Redacted Culture Cast. And then from there, we're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google, and what else? Rumble. And the background on who I am and how we got here and why I wanted to talk about this one, we got to go into the Dahlonega Rangers thing because gosh, you got so many questions going on at the same time. So what I observed in our community in the world that we're looking at right now is that everything is changing. Gun culture was shifting from a very anti-intellectual materialist worldview where it was about the stuff and the things, and now it's to the ideas and the community building. And so I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to be able to add some value in that arena. And so we started a podcast because everyone who's a millennial has to have a podcast. But that was the focus. And so I'm a writer. I'm a philosopher. I engage in these kind of subjects. We bring books on. We talk to authors. We bring people into the show to talk about those kind of things. it's an interesting time. It's a really interesting time to be alive because this is what I'm working on now. The era and the time where you had very cleanly defined limited warfare, it seems to be fading. At the same time that is happening, American gun culture is returning to this idea that there's no distinction between soldier and citizen. That just because you're a soldier, you have special training, which is kind of a myth, by the way. It's more like a breadth of experience. Um, I never took a single class that made me some sort of John Wick ninja. I got good at shooting because I did it for 15 years. I got good at CQB because I did it for 15 years. I've been doing this for a long time. And so the distinction between citizen and soldier is also becoming gray because of our equipment and our gear and our training, but also cultural philosophy and how we look at these kind of things. And so that's kind of the focus there.
I feel like I missed some awesome explanation of some cool stuff.
I was just talking.
But I'm back.
I was just talking about how in our day and age. So, and this is, we can close it off pretty quick on this one. But so after the invention of the atom bomb, warfare kind of changed rather quickly because we had sort of a glass ceiling that you didn't want to break past. We wanted to keep war under a certain scale because of nuclear deterrence, and as a result, as a result of that, like after World War II, we didn't want to have the entire world, at least for a while, kind of was in shock, and they're like, oh, we don't want to engage in nuclear war because we're going to nuke everybody off the face of the earth. Well, war continued, but it continued in a different format, and it continued in an older way than an older way than limited warfare. Insurgency is an old hat wearing new clothes. Insurgency is different than guerrilla warfare. And so a guerrilla is a standard soldier that fights by non-standard means. They will do hit and run tactics. They're not doing like Napoleonic maneuvers. And a guerrilla, the classic idea of a guerrilla is they live in the mountains, they come down, they fight, and they go back up to the mountains. Or another classic example of a guerrilla would be the Patriot, where the characters, the Benjamin Martin? Whatever. The Swamp Fox is the guy that the character is based off of, and he's a historical figure in Ranger history, where they were engaging in non-standard form of warfare. They were basically taking advantage by destroying the officers, killing off the officers, or doing ambushes and hit and run tactics. So that's a guerrilla. An insurgent is somebody who tries to blend in with a population, and he's trying to break the will of the population from supporting their own government. And so Black Lives Matter is an insurgency. Fidel Castro's guerrillas were guerrillas. It's self-explanatory. So warfare changed, though, because we had a glass ceiling. You didn't want to break through the nuclear level. And so we saw guerrilla warfare in Vietnam and Korea. And then throughout the world, we've seen insurgencies, which is the direct intention to manipulate, invade, and destroy a country from the inside, or foment revolution in that way. So
it's funny to think that the United States was actually the insurgency in Afghanistan and Iraq. We went in there and then created an insurgency to change things from the inside.
We kind of
just
did.
Overt. So
yeah. My Pashtun is not very good anymore. Zachmahayim.
Nice. Dude, I got to talk to you about Ibogaine, man. I've never taken it. You went down to Mexico? Mm-hmm. So the Ibogaine DMT experience, so Ibogaine, I hear, is like the ultimate addiction resetter. Like it's the one if you want to kill like an alcohol addiction so what was it like?
Okay, so I need to start with this one. I don't recommend it for everybody. I'm not saying that people shouldn't do it. I'm saying this is one of those things. You need to approach it kind of like a very invasive surgery. Like it's not like a take a pill, feel better thing. And so the reasons why I was interested in receiving this treatment is because I was starting to have pretty major TBI related mental faculty issues. Really hard. There were entire years of my memory that were lost. A TBI, traumatic brain injury. Most people, or for the longest time, the military thought of TBI. You get a TBI when you get blown up in a Humvee or something like that. What what research has been revealing more and more lately is it's not simply a single explosion that is the sole that can be the sole cause of a traumatic brain injury, rather multiple repeated exposures to blast. What Michael Bay does not depict very well in his films is that the lethal part of an explosion is very oftentimes the invisible part, and that is the pressure wave. And that pressure wave is rippling through, kind of like a wave. It's rippling through the air and the world, and we're ripping through space and time. And the event, and as that pressure wave is passing through less to more dense or more to less dense material, that's where you get injury. And so your skull is the density of your skull is more dense than your brain tissue. And so what a blast does, whether you're using an explosive to blow open a door, you're throwing flashbangs or 70 of them, fragmentation grenades, bombs, JDAMs, breaching explosives, M3 Carl Gustav, which is a rocket launcher. When you're using these things, you're getting exposed to blast. And so another one would be like mortars and stuff like that. And so the blast, as you get exposed to more and more of it, can cause scar tissue to build up on the surface of the brain. And so for me, I lost consciousness during an ambush in 2010 on an operation called Operation Iron Horse, where we were sneaking up. We were moving into this village because we were going after a high value target who was I don't know, just easy. Like we were going after this high value target in this area, moving in at night, and we identified that there was an ambush. And that ambush they had set up an ambush for us, and we identified it because we were all using night vision at night, and it was great. We had the advantage, and a guy was standing across this field with a camcorder in his hand. And that camcorder had like a night vision mode. And so he was trying to use that little teeny screen. And this is 2010 in Afghanistan. So like he had this really crappy little camcorder, and he thought that he could use that to find us. And so he was using this kind of Taliban guy was using this camcorder, thinking he could use the night vision mode to see people approaching. The problem is it also created this really bright light where we saw him from 1.5 miles away. And that light that was coming from that screen was so bright that we saw that behind him, there were a bunch of other guys with like machine guns and dishkas and rocket launchers and stuff like that. So we maneuvered ourselves in such a way where we countered the ambush. So we didn't necessarily ambush the ambush. We just attacked it from a flank where it was not set up to use. It was not set up to get us. But we initiated that counter ambush with an M3 Carl Gustav, and I was on the team for that one at that time. An M3 Carl Gustav is like if you're playing Call of Duty, it's the Strela. I think that's what they call it in Call of Duty now. But it's a reloadable AT4 rocket launcher. It's a recoilless rifle, and so it shoots. I know we're on a screen, so size doesn't really matter, but it's an 84 millimeter bullet gun thing that you can shoot different types of munitions out of. So what it does is, and when it fires, it pushes an extreme amount of pressure out the back of it. So if somebody is standing behind you, like this is how dangerous it can be. If I am shooting a Carl Gustav and there is a wall behind me, the reflected pressure will kill me. It will completely scramble your brains. It will be soup in your skull. And so you have to be very careful when you're firing it. You can't fire from inside a house. You can't fire from inside a structure. You got to make sure there aren't even like trees behind you because they can reflect the pressure. And so, and every once in a while, like people put compilations on YouTube of or different video platforms of people misfiring RPGs, your classic RPG 7. Because they have a similar effect, but to a lesser effect. They have the same thing. And some dude will be like standing behind it when the guy's going to go fire the RPG and just completely KO his friend. He's not coming back, dude. He's gone. Which is tragic, but it can be kind of dark humor. And so I was in a Gustav team. We initiated a counter ambush. It was a little bit bigger than we expected, so we ended up shooting so many rounds out of this Carl Gustav that I lost consciousness for like 20 seconds.
Were you holding it?
No, I was the gunner. I was the AG. I was the guy loading it. So I would load it. I would make sure there was no one behind us, and then I would turn my head around and I'd look at what we were shooting at, and I'd confirm that he was aimed at the right target, and then he'd shoot, and then I'd do the same thing. I'd look back, and I'd unload it, and put a new round in, and make sure no one had moved behind us. And then I would, again, because you're wearing night vision, I'd have to lean back, and then look forward. And the happened is, about one time when I was about right here, I was leaning back because to not knock him off with my night vision. He pulled the trigger, and that's where I caught the a little bit of, there's a little bit of reflected energy that hit me, and I was like, kind of passed out for a little bit, 10 seconds, and then he yelled at me, and I got up. So that was it. I mean, that was really it. And then it was that compounded with years of breaching, blowing open doors, using the Gustav, throwing hand grenades. It all compounded. And so Ibogaine, I know this is a really long explanation how we get there. So Ibogaine is the thing that, if I'm a Christian, and so I believe that there is a spiritual reality outside of our own lives. Like, there is something called angels and demons. And my biggest concern with Ibogaine is that I would be opening a door for essentially demon possession. That's kind of a simplified version, but I'd be opening a door for an entity to have access to me when I am in a vulnerable state. And so I went through, and this is why I'd be okay with Ibogaine, but not ayahuasca. I would not recommend ayahuasca to anybody, but I would recommend Ibogaine if the conditions apply. But the other thing that Ibogaine tends to do is it helps rebuild, and clear out those neural pathways. So TBI from rocket, damaging, having some scar tissue in the corner of the brain that has to do with impulse control, alcoholism, addiction. Ibogaine helps clean that out, helps repair those sections of the brain. And so as a result, after taking the medication, I had memories return over time, about a 6-month period. And then I am naturally a bit of an intellectual person, so emotions had become very stunted. Going to war, also being a very cerebral individual, a lot of emotions had kind of diminished. A lot of those came back. They kind of grew back out. And so I spent a lot of this summer crying and trying to figure out, like, hard emotional questions and sorting through that in a good way. And so, yeah, that's what that was like.
Dude, I love crying, the therapeutic, like when you're actually like good tears of like that. I was going through that a month ago or so. What you said there is Ibogaine and DMT? Is it two multiple treatments, or the same thing induced to DMT?
No, so Ibogaine is an African root drug, and you take that, and so the place that I went and the way that I did it was it's the same one that Sean Ryan has gone to and a couple of others. So I'm certainly no pioneer in this. So the Ibogaine experience is a 24-hour. It's not a 24-hour hallucination, but it's a 24-hour experience, and you don't lose agency. What I mean by agency is you do not become a disembodied spirit. You think you're watching something. I had some people have dreams or visions. I think that I want to refer to them specifically as dreams, because I don't think it would be right to refer to them as something like a vision, because that carries a little bit of a paranormal significance to it. But rather, your brain, while you're under the substance, you're going to have a dream, and that you're going to know you're dreaming, and it's going to last a certain amount of time. And in both humor and tragedy, my dream that I had was like I was watching a video game. It had like a loading screen. It had a starting video, like a menu. It started that way. And in the beginning of the dream, I couldn't read what the title of the menu was. But then as time progressed, it became clear, because I had to keep going back. I had these kind of loops and repeating experiences, and it was pain. And it was the title of the game was Pain. And so what I experienced during the 12 hours, the first 12 hours, which is going to be the dreaming period, was 12 hours of emotional pain, loss, suffering, watching people die, my family, everyone waste away, the world, the weight of the world on your shoulders, the light, seeing all of time scroll by of your life, like kind of like a quick movie, and then getting to the end, when then a screen pops up, your life, what for? Like those kind of questions, and they weren't easy. And this is why I'm very careful to recommend it to people, because I've seen it do good for people, but you can't approach this lightly. You cannot. This is the biggest warning. It's not a one-step solution, but there is something there. And so if you approach it with a loose New Age spiritualism, I'd avoid it at all costs.
You mentioned that it was when you were seeing that loading screen and it didn't, at first you couldn't read it, but then when you kept going back, I wonder if that was neural pathways reforming. And at first it's like, amorphous. And then the second time you did, it's like, oh yeah, this pathway. And then like by the third or fourth time you've cracked the code. And
yep, there was a couple of very clear points in that, because again, you're not unconscious. You're kind of in an odd state, and you're violently vomiting a lot of this, uncomfortable. But there is a section where I could legitimately feel as if somebody had attached like a 3D printer to the corner of my skull, and a laser was going through and it was fixing something.
yeah.
It literally felt like a laser, like.
Oh, that's so good. I look at the brain, how it's growing up in the middle. There's that crack down the middle of the brain, and it looks like gray matter's coming up and twisting out of it and writing like that. Like you're saying, like a laser is like etching data onto it.
Yep. So that was
the fuck.
It was pretty crazy, man. It was definitely one of those things where, like, I come from a Christian household. Like so when I grew up, when I was a kid, you either did meth or went to church. So like I do not come from a long history of any experience in drugs. Like no weed. By this time I had not smoked weed. Like I've not nothing except for like alcohol. And I was having issues with alcohol, but there were other issues that were much deeper. And so after the Ibogaine experience, like it was very painful. Memories were brought back, and there were things. I went back to certain points in my life where things changed for the worse, and so I had to like address those things, or at least bear witness to them. And then so we took the medication, and that took 24 hours. You're kind of in a taxic state. You can't really move your muscles very well. Everything is a very odd thing, and we were being taken care of. It was very medicinal. It was very, very well done. Like it's not like they give you a bunch of drugs and throw you in a crate and just let it happen. Like there's staff watching over you the whole time, which was nice. But then we did the DMT thing, and so you do the Ibogaine, you have a full day, you have a full recovery day, and then you go and you take DMT. And again, from a guy who has no drug experience, no hallucinogenic stuff like that, it was kind of wild.
What was that like?
I've heard a lot of people talk about DMT in different ways. This is my standpoint. First needs to be stated. Again, I view it as a dream, not as a vision. I'm not seeing something that's real. I'm seeing a dream of something. I'm watching a movie, a recreation. Now, DMT does tend to feel like an out-of-body experience. I took it. My cerebral mind could not let go of reality, so I just saw crashing shapes for a while. Just madness, static, like having a static screen right in front of your face. Came out, went back in, or took a second hit, went back down, and then I got to see two things. One of them is very personal and will remain that way, and then the other one is I got to see the end of time. What a vision, a dream, not a vision, like a reality. It wasn't real. It was a vision, or it was a dream. It wasn't a vision. It was a dream. I got to see a dream that would be something like when the veil of time is pulled back, the end of time has been reached, and the Christians are reunited with God, and have a semblance of feeling what that's like, or what I would think it feels like. I'm very, very skeptical to think of it entirely too much as like a supernatural experience. I don't think I was actually seeing the end of the world, but I think I was having a dream where, because I dream very often as like in my normal life, but my dreams are very melancholy and negative. So I had a dream where I got to there was a semblance of hope, and that was, I wouldn't say it's life changing, but it was like, okay, I can do this. I came out of the Ibogaine dream asking, thinking that I came out of the Ibogaine dream hoping that I would have some semblance of resolution, and all I was given was pain of my human failures and my moral failures and all the things that I didn't do in life. And then I had no hope. and it was just completely crushing. And then when I took the DMT, I got a small window of hope, and that was a big changing experience for me.
I wonder if that stuff, I think of the brain as a radio receiver a lot of times, and like it's tuning to frequencies that it's getting these ideas and thoughts are coming in and kind of causing your brain to write certain code, which is a shape that can be transmitted to a vibrate, like cymatically into a frequency. So like depending on what shape it is the frequency. And that stuff opens up your brain to become a lot of different shapes at once, and then it has access to all the different frequencies in the radio, and like you're tuned, and you found the channel of hope, which is like 101.7 or whatever the hell it is. And now that your brain's able to tune to that, because it's always there, it's just imagining, it's just if you perceive it or not. And
it was a brief respite. It was a brief opportunity away, and like, it's simple, but it's there. So like I don't remember what it's like or it feels like, but I know that it was there. And so like I know, in other words, like I know, so you go from kind of, I wouldn't say a numb state, but pre the Ibogaine, it's like a lot of my emotions are pretty numb, pretty dulled. And then taking the chemical helped restore some of that neural pathways that had to do with feeling and emotions and thoughts. Our feeling and emotions, because that was very stunted and it was difficult, and then of course impulse control and having issues with that. But part of the process of that is you have to open up this you're opening your mind back up to the experience of pain and just like a gut wrenching emotional pain of not simplistic things either, but like I got to see. There's one part of the dream was I got to see everybody that I knew in the world and everybody that I cared about. They were in this caricature version of the world, kind of a claymation thing. And I got to see them all lined up in a state of absolute ruin, as if it was my result. And so, like, I have a close friend who had just bought a house, and his house had collapsed, and his child had died. Or I had seen my mother in some state of more or physical decay. My dad was nowhere to be found. All these kind of horrible things. And so it was like capitalizing on fear. Or I'm an intellectual guy, and so I tend to be cerebral. I tend to try to solve things in philosophical ways and understanding what is the mechanism of the argument and trying to figure it out. And so as a result, I was faced with madness, just looping cycles of madness. It's like you just have to get beat up by madness. It's depressing. Or another one being like I saw this creature and I come up and say, well, if you let me in, I'll make it better. And that's making a deal with the devil and saying no, but having to do that and then saying no, but not getting a reward. Like you don't get a reward for saying no to the devil. And it's not, and I had been thinking about the world as in like, well, I'm a Christian. I went to school for theology. I read Greek, so I can read the New Testament in its original language. I've been studying for this a long time. God, I didn't do that. I didn't become this thing. Where's my reward? And then that's the emotional pain until afterwards, later, this is 6 months later, and I'm journaling and I'm going, that's not the relationship that we as mankind have with God. Well, this is not an exchange. We either worship God, we don't exchange with him. He's not a bank. He's not a person we negotiate with in the same way that we negotiate with one another. But the pain had to happen. The emotional pain had to happen. That moment of, let's just say, hope that was given in the DMT experience. And I wouldn't recommend doing it all the time, and I wouldn't recommend it often, but that small window of hope led to now, okay, you know what? It's painful. We're going to endure it. This is much more difficult than a deployment. Deployments are easy. Gunfights are easy. Going to war is easy. I can navigate this stuff. I've done this for 15 years. I can figure this stuff out. But the hard part is, okay, well, who am I and who is God and what am I trying to do and what do I believe in? And then having to go through that pain and sort through it and knowing that at the end there is something that is true, that truth is not dependent on my perspective. It's not dependent on my ability to see it. There is truth, and occasionally I can see it, and that's good enough for me.
Did you feel it in your gut or in your heart when you were taking the Ibogaine and or the DMT? I think you have a lot of neural pathways in your brain, your heart, and your stomach that they're each like a kind of brain, and certain chemicals, I'll feel them in different areas.
DMT, let's see, Ibogaine, probably not, because you're just vomiting. You are violently, it does cause your body to violently throw up. your body purges a lot of material at that time. You start sweating and stuff. This is why I'm saying it's like it's not a comfortable experience. And so that, but when I was coming out of the DMT dream, which only lasts like 20 minutes, the first thing that I noticed was my fingertips. So like no I don't no sight, like there's no spatio temporal awareness going on. It was like a little bit of my fingertips and then my heartbeat. It's like it's like if your entire sensory array, everything, touch, taste, smell, hearing, everything was gone, and all you can feel is your heart going. You can't feel your legs, you can't feel your hips, you can't feel your stomach, you can't feel your hair, the wind in your face. It's just your heart going. That's what that felt like for a second.
It's interesting that you said the fingertips, because that's like the extremity, the most extreme, far away from your central nervous system is the thing you felt first.
Yep, and I was doing I was doing this to see if my hand would return.
Did you listen to? Oh, what's that?
No music.
No music. It was just silence for the most part. Was it silence?
I don't remember. I think so.
Do you think you'll do it again? Is that the kind of thing where you're like, oh, I have plans. You have plans to do it again, or is it? You mentioned DMT once in a while or not that often, which made me think that maybe you would consider doing that again. But like, what about Ibogaine?
There's a part of me that would be open to it, but I think that door is going to be closed for a long time.
That's what I notice about psychedelics is they're not like amphetamines. I'm not like, oh, got to get my fix. Like, yo, that experience fucking rocked me my core. I'm good for a couple years.
Yeah,
and I know how to get back to there in my mind if I need to.
Yeah, I have no intention of doing it again right now. I know that some people have. I know that there are different decisions that people may make. I don't have a full. I'm not omniscient. I don't know what everything in the future will have to bring. I approach it extremely cautiously though, and that is, I went with people that I knew, people who I trusted, people who I had done things with, who I could trust in a very, very dire situation. So I was not going alone. I was going with people who I had been in very, very uncomfortable situations before. We'd built a bond, a friendship. So there's a lot of prerequisites. However, I had taken about 6 months of time to seek after counselors and mentors and people to explain to me their opinions on the subject and talk to me about it and say these are the concerns, whether it's like you shouldn't go here, especially religious leaders and followers, or not religious leaders and followers, but religious, like I have a mentor who's a friend who is a Delta Force guy, and I was like, hey, I'm looking at doing this. Do you know anybody who has anything about it? And he goes, go talk to this guy. I can trust him. I can recommend him. And so I go talk to that guy and we develop a friendship. His name, one of them is Will Spencer. He's a guy out of Phoenix, Arizona. He runs a page called The Renaissance of Men. And his experience was he was kind of a new age. He went real far down the new age psychedelics trip for a long time and then came out of that, left that behind and became a Christian. And he is extremely he's clearly done it a bit, but he has a lot of warnings. He has a lot of concerns. So he was a useful bit there. Would I take it again? My gut reaction is I'll probably not. I don't have another reason to.
Did you when you were getting ready to take the Ibogaine, did you have like a dieta, the ayahuasca? When you take ayahuasca, there's like a 10-day fast cleanse where you don't eat salt, no sugar, you don't have sex with someone else. You keep like, and so your diet is like steamed vegetables, very low sodium. And then you don't purge. When you go take the ayahuasca, you're not puking your guts because you haven't put that bread in your stomach for the last 6-7 days. And I wonder if Ibogaine is something similar.
I wouldn't be surprised if the physiological experience from like your stomach and your digestive system is quite similar. But no, we were on a limited diet for about 4 days, maybe.
Oh, before, specifically for the Ibogaine?
Yeah, about 3
What was the diet?
No caffeine, no sugar, no caffeine, no like regular sugar. Obviously no alcohol you have to be out no alcohol for a week. I want to say very limited. I don't think we were eating any meat that wasn't fish. It was just it was a lot of vegetables and fruits. It was a
That's
lot of,
super similar.
yeah.
Yeah,
Now there were some grains though. There were some bread, and so like it wasn't a complete purge. I think some of that had to do with the location that was putting it on. Also has some. It's not vegan, but it's very health conscious in that regards. There was a little bit of like there was some meditation, some breath work, breathing thing. Calling it breath work is a little like, I mean, I wouldn't call it work. It might be like attention, giving attention to it. But yeah, we did some, like we did some physical preparation for it, which was very simple, like stretching, something kind of like yoga, something kind of like, just changing our diet so you're not going from a Monster and a Red Bull to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm thinking about taking the ayahuasca pretty soon, but also that if I've got a parasite, I haven't done a parasite cleanse really ever focused in my life, and I bet I wouldn't be surprised. I spent time in South America. If I have some sort of parasite, that if I don't do a parasite cleanse first and I take the ayahuasca, I'll be wrestling with this demon in the vision for 24 hours, but it will be the fucking parasite in my body. So if I can just cleanse myself before I go in, maybe less taxing. Of course, maybe the ayahuasca experience will kill the parasite. I don't know.
Is this a first for you?
The ayahuasca, I've tasted it in the past when I was in South
Mhm.
America, and it was very bitter grass, tasted
Mhm.
like, and I could feel the DMT. I've puffed on DMT, but I've never like blasted off to the fractal realm through that
Mhm.
substance. So they would be a first to do it ceremonially.
Okay. I like as a friend, I'd be very very careful. I would want to caution you with ayahuasca. This is going to 100% come from a Christian worldview. Ayahuasca is inherently tied to a spirit, kind of a matronly spirit that is not in your favor. So I would not. I'm. That's one thing that I was very concerned about when it came to Ibogaine is that like ayahuasca is very much so a combination of like a physical experience and then a spiritual experience. And so just be it's I'm not saying just be careful.
It's going to be Mother Earth, the spirit of the woman that's like, you fucked me over 20 years ago, Crossland, and it's because of you that the Earth is suffering. And then I'll see all the things I didn't do. Like I could have helped Boy and Slat with the ocean cleanup project,
it
but I
will
feel like
it will
I,
deceive you. It will
I'm
try
gonna.
to it'll seek to deceive you.
Okay, good.
Hmm.
With these dreams, were you able to control the dream state? Like when you say, my friend is walking in the room, you use his name, and then he walks in the room like a lucid dream, or
No.
were you just along for the ride?
I don't you part of the issue was I wanted to try to have some control over it and you don't. There okay, there is a difference between this. Um there here's what here I don't have a clinical answer for you, but I have a bit of one. And that answer is something like the beginning part of my dream was me trying to wrestle with the dream because I wanted to get something done. All right. I was like, I'm in this state for 12 hours. Why don't we clean up all the garbage in my brain? Let's go through all these issues and sort them out and clean them out. And so what it looked like is like you're kind of in calling it psychedelic isn't even the right term, but like so I'm watching these scenes pop before my eyes this is like phase 3 of it, or phase there's like 9 parts, but whatever. So like at this one point early on in the dream is I would have a sort of like a combination of a memory but almost like a video clip play in front of my head, and then it would that one or it might even just be a representation of an idea like a llama, or like I remember being here, or a picture of the small corner of the walkway the house that I grew up in, or something like not like a full picture, but like almost like, well, what is this? And they show you like this much of the screen and you go, oh, okay. But they were ideas, and so one idea would lead to another idea, so it'd go 1 2 3 4 back to 1. So I'd have idea back to 1, and it would create a loop. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to sort out the loops. So if I could, if I would, my brain was going at hyperspeed, going through all these different ideas, like pop, 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 and then every time I found a loop, I would, in sort of this vision standpoint or this vision mentality, this dream, kind of like crank the machine so that thing I would identify it and it would throw that loop in the trash can. I was trying to get rid of loops. So in an essence, there was a control factor that I was engaging with. Okay, idea, 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 idea. We're looking for loops. We're looking for loops. We're trying to solve loops, right? And so every time I'd find one, we'd throw it away because the loop would get thrown out, but the ideas wouldn't disappear. It would just be correcting bad thoughts. But as I'm doing that, I'm constantly getting interrupted, almost by like cartoons or there's cartoons in your head, or there's like commercials or these things. It's constantly getting interrupted, and so like I'm getting more and more and more frustrated because I'm trying to solve these things. I'm trying to work through this thing. I'm like, okay, I'm in this dream right now. I know I need to be careful. I don't want to just go willy-nilly with it because I don't want to open doors for things to come in, and I don't want to just accept everything that I see. I want to be wise here. So I'm dealing with these, these loops, right? These kind of, and I'm searching through them, and I'm trying to go through my memories and my ideas and my thoughts, almost like ideas were turned into engrams, and I could just like go through them, but I'm constantly getting interrupted. And so as that process is going on, I'm getting more and more and more frustrated because I'm not being able to do the work that I'm supposed to do, until eventually it continues to zoom out so far that I see it's all one giant loop. All of my ideas are this one giant loop. And you're like, well, so that's when depression sits in. It just hits like it's all in vain. It's all pointless. Why am I even here? Fine, show me something, right? And so I don't have control over it. I don't have control over everything that's going on. You do not get to choose when you're in it and when you're out of it. You're just there. And so you know that what you're seeing is not real. So like, you open your eyes for a minute and you can see through a blindfold, and it's like, oh, I know this is not real. I'm hearing voices that I know that are not real. And you're not so lost that you think you're in some sort of other state. And then as the dream progressed, this different things were shown, and like you kind of understand them. I know why I'm here. I know why I'm in this scene right now. I went back to when I was 13 and I got to see something happen. And all these kind of things, like I got to relive some experiences and then have those like almost like as a not an objective but as a third party. But then it came close to that end part where this is what I'm talking about, how much control that you have. In the beginning was the fight with control, and then as it went on, there was the option where I was frustrated, I was angry. I had gone from, you're almost like through your like 4 layers or 4 levels of depression or whatever it is, like energy, I was trying to work it out, motivated, to like depressed because none of it's working, to like anger, to anguish, or whatever, just suffering. And so then as all that's been going on and the pain was there, then I was offered an opportunity, and this is very distinct, is that this spirit thing approached in a way, offered to make it better. He said, because I was in that state, I was like, what was the point of me doing this? This is all just painful. Like, why did I even come here? And it comes in this thing, and I'm going to be very clear on it. A spirit approaches me and says, I can make it better. You just have to let me in. And the answer is no. I chose no. I distinctly remember having choice. I had agency. I knew where I was. And I was like, no. And then the dream ended. It was over. And that is an important thing where it's like I didn't have control over the dream, but I could still make decisions within it.
A lot of people will say that like they let the Holy Spirit into them. I've heard them say like the spirit of Jesus or Christ or God is within me. I wonder if that's like a form of possession, not evil or good. It just is possession.
Biblically speaking, when you are saved, the Holy Spirit does enter your person.
Yeah, because what you oh, sorry to interrupt there.
Yep.
It sounds like you were faced with that choice and chose I'll do it. I'll go it alone.
Well, what it
At
was
least for this round.
Yeah, well, what it was certainly not the Holy Spirit.
I wonder if though when people think they're letting the Holy Spirit in, if they're actually just letting some demon in that.
Yep.
Like you don't need something to help you. I mean, maybe that's bold to claim. Like God is pumping our hearts,
You
this
do
energy
need,
field.
yeah, and this is that theological argument. You do need Christ. Like this is just going to be me as a Christian. You do need it. Like I need it. I need God. I need God in my life. I need Him in a way where my ability to perceive basic reality is wholly and entirely dependent on his continued process of creation. The fact that I wake up and breathe every day is a short answer of I need him. The idea of the consistency of creation, why is the world thus regular, is entirely based on the regularity of God. Any ability to evaluate morality is dependent on the existence of a source of morality, and that is who God is. And so while I say that is in like, I need it, yes, I need God, but what was there was not God. It was it was a way out. It was a way out. It was a way to say, hold on to a little bit of something and justify my actions and my experiences. And so
Dude, you were like, nope. And then they're like, all right, he beat the game.
that's what,
Simulation over.
yeah, I mean, that I would have loved what that, I would have loved that to be the feeling, but but when I left that, the dream kind of ended, it was just crying and pain. Like
I know
it was just emotional
that,
pain for a long time.
and that wondering of like, what if I had said yes to that? Would it have opened up that feeling of regret that can cause even more pain? I don't know if
Yeah,
that seeped into your gut.
I think the feeling was, so in the Old Testament there's this story of this character who's known as Job. And I'm not going to compare myself to a biblical character as if like we're on the same plane of existence. In the beginning of the book of Job, it says something like he was a man who was righteous and blameless, there were none like him, or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. But one thing, and this is what it came out of, is this experience of emotional pain. The good thing that came out of it was I was, for on a, not just on an intellectual standpoint, but on an emotional position, able to feel for a moment just how badly I needed God in my life. Like, I was a Christian already, but my belief in God had become something kind of like my belief in the planet Pluto. Like, I know it's out there, but it doesn't really matter to me. Like, Pluto can continue existing and it has no relevance to my life. If it were to phase out of existence tomorrow or in 30 seconds, it wouldn't change who I am. And so my belief in God was kind of like that. It was factually correct, but it had a disconnect. It had become that way. It had become tired or disconnected. And so that experience of pain was the experience of knowing with some absolute certainty that I needed this. I needed it. I needed God. Like, I didn't need it like I need a fix. I didn't need God like I needed a meal. I needed God like my very concept of existence. My mind would unravel without this. My physical capability, I would descend into madness in the worst of ways, or whatever. Violence ad infinitum without purpose and destruction. And I that was what that pain was like. And it was that experience of, I need that, but I don't have it. I can't generate it in myself. I cannot be my own savior. And that pain was so intense because of this, because it, for like maybe a window of time, it was, and I won't say it was a window because it stretched on over the summer. It was a very difficult summer for me, of like of sitting here and reading my journal and writing in my books, and writing about how, and just sort of having that part of you being made apparent to you, to yourself, on how, like, I can't even go about, there's nothing I can accomplish in life, not just physical, like I've got achievements and things like that, but it was empty. It was there's this statement by Jordan Peterson that catches a lot of people's attention, and I think it's for good reason. He said sometimes you need to burn off all the dead wood, but that little 5% that remains at the end is worth it. And so what had happened was, I was going through a process of cutting away all the dead flesh. Okay, this is useless. Like, this is something that was wrong. This is like forgiveness, and not, I'm getting rid of forgiveness, like cutting away the dead flesh, cutting away the dead wood, that burning it off and letting it go away in the crucible. And then eventually I got to that little teeny knot in the scent of who you're of your existence. And this is both metaphysical and personal. And I had gotten to that knot, that little teeny spot at the end of like this little nut of sorts. If you were to crack it, inside it, you'd find a little glowing flame of innocence and childhood and courage and strength. Because you have to cut away all the dead flesh to get to that centerpiece. And so I had under, like, I'm not afraid of physical conflict. Emotion, this sort of thing is very different. Like, how do I handle it? Don't I like do how many times am I avoiding the problem that's inside my head or inside my heart, distracting myself, whether it's through things like alcohol or war or whatever. And so I had started to get to that teeny little piece of live wood at the core. I was cutting away through all this dead material, um, the rotten parts of my soul, and all the black blood mud that had stuck to the walls of it and built it up. And so as I was cutting away, at some point in time, I remembered that thing by Peterson that you're going to burn away all the dead wood, but what is left, that little live wood piece at the end, is going to be worth it. And so when I got to that core of my being and I cracked it open, what I found inside was the blackest of hells. Nothing good. There was no life in me. There was no joy, no innocence, no honest. There was nothing. It was just a malicious little creature that justified everything for its own ends. And then there was where I realized that even at my core, I am insufficient. I cannot make myself into being righteous. And that was that pain. That's where then boom, you see it, you go, oh, I don't have a little flame of perfect goodness and innocence deep inside, covered by malice and the damages of the world. It's not just all scar tissue with a perfect good little me in the inside. Who I am at my very, very, very core is not a good person. I'm not like a little saint. There is something in me created in the image of God, but that is where dying to yourself goes from being an experience of pain where you have to sacrifice the things that you think are going to make your life better to an experience of joy where you realize dying to myself is not always just suffering. Like, it's not just saying no to the candy so that you can be healthy in the future. Like, when Christ says to us in the New Testament, you must die to yourself, you must take up your cross and follow me, we are astounded by the joy of the disciples that they do this. They follow him and they're full of joy. And that always astounded me because I always had approached faith sort of like this dutiful emotional experience of like, well, I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to be somber, and I'm going to be and I'm going to bear the weight of my whatever. And eventually what happened here is that as I got to that little teeny core, who I was at the very core, I had to take that and give it away, give it to Christ. I had to give it up. I cannot even solve this. I cannot make this better. At my core, I am wicked. And that is an experience of joy, not of suffering, not of pain, but of joy, that I get to say, here I am. I need you.
It's kind of making me think of like a room of black mold, where like black mold toxicity just in the room's not going to clean itself. Like, that's the core that you ripped open and you see this blackness, this seeping mold toxicity, but then light can kill it. So you expose it to God's love.
To the source of light. Yep.
And something that whatever that toxicity over time can be purged.
Yep. We are not meant to be, we are not created in the image of God to be in conflict with him. So we're not made to be in tension between the world and with Christ. We are supposed to be pursuing to become more Christ-like. So yeah.
When I noticed about when you were saying you're cutting away the dead skin, these layers of just obsolescence or whatever, I think when that happens, you also cut off pieces of live skin. Like, if you're cutting off just the moldy part of an apple, there's some healthy skin coming off with that. And even if you just try and cut just around the mold, there's that area between the mold and the healthy apple that's like half mold that you're going to cut off. And that's kind of still semi-healthy with nerve endings in it. So it's like you're like slicing I know that experience. Like, it's like removing family, removing friends, removing what you thought was family and friends, and like having to reform yourself from the center. I went through it kind of I took on a lot of pain on the internet in like 06, 07, 08 by doing internet videos with people that were in pain and listening to them for long periods of time.
Yeah, you've talked about it a bit.
Yeah, and then I felt like, oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. I failed, and I almost fucking ended it. But then I stuck around, and I mean, it's so compared to someone that's seen like their friends die and people die, and to kill people, that is not I can't. That would be a little more, I think, gutturally transformative. But I understand that whole like ripping yourself apart and having to kind of just trust that you're gonna grow back healthy.
Yeah, I don't think it's useful to try to create like a hierarchy of suffering in that regards. Like, for example, for me, watching somebody die is different. And here's a case in point. On one of my deployments, we had we lost a couple people, but it wasn't like they weren't there voluntarily. Like, it was tragic, but it was tragic and understandable. We went to war. We knew what we were doing. Like, no, it wasn't a mistake for anybody. No one was like, I didn't want to be here. And so it was tragic to lose those people. I think for me, the bigger tragedy is one of them was a former team leader of mine, and we did not get along. We got along horribly. And so to see him leave this world with no resolution between us, that was difficult. So, but it's not like to see human suffering is we can understand it to some extent. Yeah.
That's interesting. That perspective of how things ended is
Mhm.
is more important than that they ended.
At least from where I'm at. Yeah, like it's that it's tragic that we lost him for sure. But I'm not going to pretend like I lost a dear friend. That's not true. We were not on good terms. And that is something that is different. And I don't. It's like I'm not trying to create some sort of persona like, oh man, it's so hard we lost him and we were such good friends. Like, no, that dude and I hated each other. We hated each other, and um and there's a part of me that wishes that I had done a better job. I had been a better. He was a team leader. I was a minion. I was a private at the time, and so like there's a part of me that kind of wonders if I could have done that better. But that was 12, 13 years ago now.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Do you think that there's spiritual shielding in combat, that if you hate one of your teammates, they're more likely to get killed than if you have like this immense love and respect, that it kind of produces like a spiritual guard around you and your
Uh,
friends?
I don't. I don't. I don't. If I did, I wouldn't be able to see it in any way other than mysticism. Like I have no way to quantify it or qualify it. I don't. Um, I think that having a solid worldview and understanding your frame of morality protects you and your people from things like PTSD. But I don't the I can't I have a really I don't think I can get behind like this the kind of the mysticism of like the psychological shield, because how many units of love.com, or how many units of love do I need to be pushing on somebody for it to create a sufficient shield to protect them? I don't know.
Yeah,
There's
it's
no
like
way to. It becomes amalgam. It becomes like so ambiguous that it's unmeasurable, and if it's unmeasurable, then I can't engage in it.
the paladin. I don't know, you play D&D?
No, but when I played World of Warcraft as a kid, I played a paladin because he was
Yeah,
yep.
the paladins are legit, dude. They have auras of protection.
Yep.
So like just their sheer force of will or charisma encourages people to stay alive. Maybe it gives people a clearer head to make better decisions, which can.
That is true. That is 100% true. Is that you can read, here's a good one that many people have read is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And what he comes up to understand is that the people who maintain a will to live are more likely to survive great atrocity. The other side of that too is you look at how the Taliban defeated America in the 20-year war in Afghanistan. They believed in their mission to the end. America just kind of quit for political and cultural reasons.
Yeah.
So like we didn't finish I can even say in 2010 we didn't even really know what the end goal in Afghanistan was. And
What
so we didn't know.
what was it? Looking back, do you know what it is now?
So some things are obvious. One of them being Osama bin Laden. Okay, but I was overseas in the region, not too far from where bin Laden was killed. Like I wasn't a part of the mission, but I was kind of privy to certain details at the time. And so it didn't come as much as a surprise as it did for the rest of the world. But the issue is this kind of this worldview, this belief system is how I need to almost go back to starting the question. What happened in Afghanistan? Um, We are the American empire, if you want to call it that, is at war across the world, and we will be, and we will always be. We will always be at different levels of war. The question is how much of it is going to be over here in that irregular format of warfare, and how much of it is going to be over here in the overt format of warfare. The idea that we could just leave all of this is not possible. We are engaged. The world, as technology increases and as it gets smaller, means that if we do not engage in this willingly, it will come for us. And that means, and that is anywhere else in the world. So with Afghanistan, one thing, there were certainly missions and objectives that we had that were not made available or allowed to the American people, because the American people probably didn't have the stomach or the care to engage in it. And one of them is like disrupting this network, destroying this terrorist cell, getting rid of this group of people. And I don't mean like a genocide. I mean like this organization is exclusively developed, and it's gathering disaffected young men for the express purpose of destroying the West or something, right? And they are engaging in a terror cell network, and so we're going to go destroy this terror cell. We're going to go root out this thing. We're going to go destroy this drug trade, human trafficking trade, whatever it is. We're going to disrupt this thing. And what I mean disrupt a network is like we're going to kill the people that move the people or something like that. So as Americans and as with our intelligence apparatus and our capabilities, we are always going to be engaged in something like that. To what scale is going to vary depending on the circumstances. And whether we should or we shouldn't is sort of it is a question that changes per scenario. And maybe it's not should we, it's who is engaged in. So if Afghanistan, the reason why I think I would describe Afghanistan was a failure is because it was the closest thing to a conventional war with no clearly stated goals. The objective was not, it was something amalgamous and ambiguous, like creating a democratic stability in the Middle East. If we wanted to do that, we should have said Afghanistan is the next territory of the United States. This is our territory now. And then we colonize it. And I know anti-colonials are going to lose their mind on this, but we straight up colonize the entire country, and then placing our values into it, injecting our values into it, and building the infrastructure for that to happen. That's what we should have done if we were going to invade it like we did. Otherwise, we should focus on influence campaigns and infrastructure and developing and special operations solely. The problem is that we chose neither. If we're going to be building bases and building a country or whatever, if we're going to engage in country building, it's our territory now. Stop acting like it's not. If we're going to just, and I mean that in both in a positive and a negative light, like it's a very serious question. But if we're not going to do that, if we're exclusively going to go after, say, the Haqqani network, then just go after the Haqqani network, just get rid of them, and then leave. That's it. So we did neither of those. We did this kind of nation building thing, which is sort of like half-assed colonialism, where we're going to give you resources and we're going to make a bunch of money and we're going to do a military industrial complex. And then we went after terror cells that are international and national in organization. And what I mean by cells is that this group of people don't necessarily know that this group of people is, but they work together to go kill Americans or whatever. And yes, ideology comes into play here. But we would go after these groups of people, but then kind of like hang around and not finish one or the other. So that's the issue. That's what happened in Afghanistan, is that we didn't really have an end goal, whether it was to make Afghanistan a territory of the United States or a vassal state of some sort, or to simply go after an individual network. We just kind of did a half-ass of both. And if we were to pick one, finish it, or do the other and focus on it, and at least be honest about it, we would be better off. Instead, we're going to colonize your country without saying we're colonizing it, or we're going to invade, we're going to enter your country, and we're going to destroy these human trafficking networks, or these networks of people who are doing the evil on a global scale. They're there. We just haven't had to deal with a lot of them in America for a long time. We're gonna contend against this force that is functioning in an irregular manner, and we're going to go against it. We're either going to do one or we're going to do the other. Instead, we did a half of both, and we properly got the result we deserve.
It was devastating, the surrender, absolutely. That was like the greatest military surrender in American history, I think. It was the biggest army on earth surrendered to the Taliban at $80 billion worth of equipment.
Yeah,
And
and the fact that it was so public, like there's so many cameras. And this is the double-edged sword. I think it's a good thing and it's a bad thing at the same time. Well, it's not a bad thing, but I think this is the double-edged sword. The fact that we have cameras everywhere means that you can't lie. The problem with there being cameras everywhere is there's so much information that do people know how to evaluate it? Probably not.
Yeah, and deep fakes. We're still in a phase where like you can't lie, kind of, but we're almost out of that phase. The being able to lie with video is going to be. I just watching a drone swarm in China doing like fire instead of fireworks. Now they use a bunch of drones to make like looks like a guy is walking through the sky, and like that's like the 8-bit version of what we're going to start seeing in our skies and here in our skies with like talking plasma, projection of sound through triangulated lasers into the air.
Yep.
You'll hear like, I'm coming for you, like crazy stuff. You might see battleships in the sky. Then you might see a rocket come down from there that was actually fired from orbit above. Who knows what's these potential deep fakes.
I think it's gonna become much more invasive. I think that warfare is going to affect the average American citizen a lot more than what they're used to. But they're not going and the average American citizen is going to have to be able to develop methods of evaluating information. They're going to have to be able to. We're just going to have to figure out how and to be more overt about it. With the expanse of information, we live in the post-information age. I can Google any answer I want. I can get any answer to any question I want, so long as I spend enough time looking for it. And I can even if they're directly contradictory to each other.
And I imagine there'll be AI that will whip up the answer that it thinks you want if it sees that you keep asking specific questions just to satisfy you, like a malicious AI system where it's like, let's just tell him what he thinks he wants to hear so we can pacify him.
Yeah.
Or it could be a psyop where they're like, let's feed him the information he's looking for so he hates his neighbor a little bit more. Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean that stuff's happening now. It is. Like it certainly is.
The age of discernment, man. That's what we should call the 21st century.
Ooh, that is well done. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the biggest vulnerability we have is the being tricked into fighting our neighbors. Like nobody wants to invade this country. No one wants to throw their army away like that, but they would love to see this country fight itself to death. I would imagine.
Well, large portions of this country would like to see itself fight itself.
Yeah, we got to change that. So I like doing conversations like this. Forrest Cooper.
Yeah,
that was a great conversation, man.
We've been going on way longer than we expected.
It was 2.5 hours almost. I really enjoyed it.
I'm used to it, but yeah, no, Ian, it's really great to talk to you again. So I'm looking forward to it. Let's have another conversation.
Let's do it, man. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for watching the show. Like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, follow Forrest. Links will be in the description of the video. If not, you want to have the simplest place for people to find your network.
The Google, or sorry, the hub is redactedllc.com. That's the website. And then I'm most active on Instagram, which is at redactedllc, and then at YouTube. If you want it, we just got monetized. I'm so small. I'm trying to figure out how to fund this project. It's madness. So if you look for the Redacted Culture Cast, that is us.
All right. And there'll be links down below. So check it out if you're on that available network. See you guys later.
All right. Take care. Bye.